This talk from Whitley Strieber was delivered in December of 2022 in New York City at an inquiry into anomalous experiences and the phenomenon. We've recently announced the next conference event in this series, which will be happening on Saturday, April 8th, 2023 in New York City and online. We'll be joined by Leslie Kane, Ryan Graves, Derek Pitts, James Fox, Elizabeth Crone, Peter Lavenda, and Dr. Daniel Ingram. Hosted by Leslie Kane, James Iandoli, and me, J. Christopher King. Tickets to join us live or online are now available at aninquiry2023.com, but they're going fast. That link is down in the show notes and also in the comments. We're looking forward to the upcoming conference, and we hope to see you there. And now, we bring you Priscilla Stone and Whitley Strieber.
I hope everybody's having a wonderful night. It's definitely wonderful to see everybody here together again, and it just makes my heart so full. Tonight, I kind of want to give some remarks on the disclosure movement and experiencers. So in the modern disclosure movement, there's a heavy focus on legislation and what is often termed credible witness accounts. Although data and legislation would contribute to the process of proving and understanding the existence of UFOs and their occupants, I can't help but wonder about those who have had a sort of personal disclosure in their life. I'm talking about the vast array of not only experiencers, but also the anomalous events experienced by them. These people whose lives were changed forever by the anomalous. This includes many phenomena from UFOs to spirits to cryptids. These experiences trigger anything from a spiritual awakening to a spiritual condemnation. I can't help but be concerned about the experiencer, who is now doubting their reality, their existence, spirituality, and nature of the universe. And too often they're forced to keep quiet. They're gagged by the overbearing presence of stigma and fearful of losing friends, families, careers, and sometimes their homes. All of this is due to an experience that, in many cases, was not asked for. This is why the education of these topics must continue. They must cover all facets of the anomalous, including but not limited to legislation, data, and experiencer accounts. As for the nature of these anomalous events, I think that it's safe to say that we're in the dark a little bit about this. And as we venture into the darkness unknown, each of us has a torch that's shedding light on truth and offering warmth and understanding to anybody that seeks it. So together, we're no longer just this lone torch, but a blazing beacon, and a blazing beacon that leads others to inquire the anomalous and accept the unknown as part of reality. Our next speaker has been a beacon for many of us, whose sacrifice and dedication to the topic of UFOs and their occupants, and the phenomena surrounding it, have paved a way for others to follow. This man bravely tore through the stigma, and was one of the first to publicly say, "This happened to me. I'm not going to sit down. I'm not going to be quiet, and I will speak my truth at all costs." He has written many books and continues the conversation to this day, educating people about the phenomena and the many entities and occupants involved. And if you have not guessed who this is by now, I am honored to welcome Whitley Strieber to the stage.
Well, I'm certainly glad to be here. And, I'm going to start a little differently from what I had planned, if indeed I had planned anything, which I had done, actually. I've got a speech. In any case, Ralph's wonderful talk got me thinking about John. And I want to tell a John story. I knew him fairly well. We had a lot of fun together, mostly. We cut up a lot. Both of us cut up a lot when we were boys, and we had fun telling stories about on each other or to each other about our childhoods. But I knew a man who was a friend of Tim Leary's, and when Tim was dying, I knew Tim, but not all that well. And when he was dying, he decided that he would have his head cryogenically frozen. And so there was a documentary to be made. The documentarists were there. Everything was going on. And the question was, lawyers had been involved. It turned out that you couldn't simply have a head in your refrigerator, a human head anyway. And so the idea was that Tim's head would be smuggled from person to person to keep it out of the hands of the authorities. And I was called and it was asked, would I hold the head for a year in a cryogenic safe and, plugged in, make sure it didn't melt. And I said, sure, of course, I'd be glad to. I mean, how can I go wrong, right? So, and I called other friends, and one after another, and they all said, absolutely not. No way. And I thought, well, who is the wildest person I know? And it occurred to me, after listening to his stories about his misspent youth building all kinds of intricate devices which shall go unnamed as a boy, and doing various things similar to what I did, which shall go unmentioned, I thought I'd call John and see what he said. And he listened to this story, and he said, why, of course, I'll be glad to. And that was very cool. He was a wonderful, cool guy. He had a willingness to look at things and do things that were just a bit beyond the edge. And as far as Harvard was concerned, way beyond the edge. But as far as us experiences were concerned, just a bit beyond the edge. And he is one of my great heroes. And I just want to thank Ralph for his dedication to the life of John Mack and to his legacy, which has been beautifully preserved and presented to the world by Ralph and his efforts. And so I enjoyed that. Good. Typical of Timothy, he had no plans whatsoever to have his head cryogenically frozen. All right. There she is. Now, why, look at that face, those big eyes that, those eyes, at Rice University, through the efforts of Jeff Kripal, there is an archive called the Archive of, I believe the Archive of the Impossible, is that? Yes. And in it are the communion letters, thousands of them that Anne saved. My wife Anne, who named our book Communion, and you'll see her, dear friend Timothy Greenfield Saunders, who you'll also see in a video in a few minutes, made a video of Anne about 15 years after the communion experience, telling how she felt when I sat down with her and told her I thought I'd been abducted by aliens. Well, I'll get into that a little bit more later. By the way, this is my website. You can follow me there, and some of you are already subscribers to unknowncountry.com, I believe, and you're most welcome to subscribe, but there's plenty of free stuff on it if you don't care to subscribe. It's a community, basically, and there's a free aspect to it as well as a subscription aspect to it. Now, what I would like to do is this. It's been a long time since the communion experience happened, and my understanding of what did happen has evolved considerably over the years. This is the cabin where it happened. We don't own it anymore. I was there a few months ago. The Travel Channel did a documentary about me called The Visitors, which you can now see on Discovery Plus, and I believe it's available for like $2 on YouTube. And so it's a 90-minute documentary. It's quite good, actually, I think. And this is where it happened, on a rather isolated little private road in upstate New York. It wasn't out in the middle of nowhere, but it was, quite isolated. And beyond those trees, there's the road, and then a couple of other houses, and then beyond that, an enormous wilderness that is owned by the state of New York. It's state land, and they will never release it. So it has, and then toward us, and in the other direction is a little town. And I took this picture from not too far from where the abduction happened. And it started, though, here in this bedroom, in that bed, actually. I was sleeping on the right side of it, and that night, and Annie was on the inside bed of the bed, and she didn't remember a thing the next morning. I was the next morning, I was distraught for no apparent reason. I was I couldn't think what had happened to me. I thought perhaps I had seen an owl in the house, and I explained to Anne, and she finally said, "Look, Whitley, there was no owl in the house." And I thought, I'm making a fool of myself. I obviously there was no owl in the house. So I said, well, yeah, obviously not. But when the sun went down, I was in this bedroom again, looking out that window, and it was snowy, and the sun was dropping, and I thought, there was no owl in the house, so what happened? And I was just mystified. This was something that came out of nowhere to me. The idea of alien abduction was not in my reality. I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of such a thing. And friends tell me that in those days, if people brought up flying saucers and stuff like that, I was rather hostile about it. You know, I'd been writing horror novels and things, though, but to me, it was sort of a very novelistic idea. It was story time, basically. I did not remember anything that had happened to me as a child, and in fact, still to this day, I'm very unsure about that, although apparently things did. So, in any case, I began to have flashes of very odd memories, and I kept remembering these figures. This is from the movie Communion, but they're quite accurate. I remembered these men looking at me and moving around very quickly, and I thought to myself, what in the world is going on? And then I began to suffer pain. I wrote a short story called Pain, in fact, during this period. I was in pain. I had pain in the side of my head and pain in my rectum, significantly enough to where I went to the doctor, and by that time, I had sort of I had a series of very strange memories. It still hadn't occurred to me that they could be anything real. So I described the memories to the doctor, and he said, well, you're telling me you were taken aboard a flying saucer by little men. He was the first person who actually said those words. And I thought, my God, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I said, well, that is what it sounds like. And he said, well, after gently telling me I had been raped, which had happened, he said, we need to do a thorough workup physically and mentally. And his thinking was that I had been assaulted, and I was in a state of, I was very traumatized. And I thought I was going crazy because of these memories. I thought I had a brain tumor. So we did an MRI scan. Brain was normal. Did a physical workup, and I had been injured pretty badly. In fact, that injury, the scar from it, I suffered from that scar for another 20, 25 years, off and on, and had to spend time quite often with specialists who would treat the pain, basically, back there. And also had to spend time watching television and listening to the radio about rectal probe jokes. I had the experience of having my rape become an international joke. That's something that's hard to deal with. And we're getting a little bit more sensitive now, at least to women, but it's, as far as I can tell, when a man's raped, it's still hilarious. It actually isn't very funny at all. So this is me in that era. You can see the face. It's a traumatized person, basically. At least that's how I see my expression. And I was trying to figure out something that made sense because I couldn't believe that this idiotic idea of aliens was real. I had not at that point been exposed to any literature at all of this. I didn't even know at that point that there was any. I thought maybe I had been attacked because of a book called War Day. War Day was a book about the dangers of limited nuclear war, published at a time when the Reagan administration was keenly interested in hardening our industrial sites against a limited nuclear attack. And I found that very concerning for two reasons. The first one was, if they did that and built a big budget through FEMA for it, which was the plan at the time, was going to tell the Russians that maybe mutually assured destruction wasn't actually such a good idea, and they may not be able to win a nuclear war they didn't start first. So I thought it was very destabilizing, and I also was concerned about nothing in the budget for, like, our houses. What about, yeah, you could save the factory, but if all the workers are dead, what's the point? So I decided to write War Day with my dear friend Jim Konetka, a science writer, and to make it a kind of a tour across the country after a limited nuclear war to see what that was like. And the book was quite influential. It was a bestseller. Parts of it were read on the floor of the United States Senate and put into the congressional record. And I thought, well, maybe it made somebody who was in favor of that program mad enough to have me assaulted in some weird way, because I just couldn't figure out any other explanation. And I was absolutely at a loss. At the same time, though, I thought in the back of my mind that I had had a psychotic break, and I had this beautiful wife and a little boy, and if she ended up married to a man who was in a mental institution, she would not be able to divorce me. She would have been left penniless with this albatross around her neck. So I began to try to get her to divorce me. And we kept having fights. We had fight after fight after fight. And this is what our marriage looked like. This is how it felt. That picture is very much how it felt. And I was trying to break that up so that she would be saved from having to deal with a mental case. Then at Christmas, my brother had sent me his usual unfortunate gift. My brother and I are great friends, and we always send each other things that we think the other person will think is absolutely ridiculous. And his gift this year had been something called Science and the UFOs, which actually he took quite seriously, but I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was another joke gift. But I opened it, and I started reading it, just basically to get my mind off of, ironically enough, off of the weirdness that was happening to me. I thought, well, this is weird. It's weird, but in a different way from my weirdness. I was assaulted by some kind of a criminal or criminals, and this is nothing about criminals. Then I got to the latter part of it, and there, to my horror and astonishment, was a story about a UFO abduction. It was the first time I'd ever heard of such a thing. And it mentioned a man named Bud Hopkins. And Bud, as it turned out, the slides are a little out of order, but that doesn't matter. Bud, it turned out, lived quite near us in Manhattan. And I said to Anne, look at this. And she said, well, this looks like what happened to you. I said, I know it does. And she said, but of course you understand it did not happen to you or anybody else. I said, well, I still want to talk to this guy. And she said, well, okay, well, we'll go talk to him. I'm going to go with you, though, because I don't want you to get overly enthusiastic about whatever this is. And because she felt like we were fighting, and I was trying to get rid of her, get her to leave me, and it was a very hard time, and she did not trust my judgment enough to send me off to meet a UFO abduction person by myself. So off we went to meet Bud Hopkins, and we met a lovely man. This is Don Klein, who he introduced us to. And, I'm just, Bud should have been in this slide, but he's not. And I don't dare try to reverse them, because then we'll end up with no slides at all. In any case, Don was the head of the New York State Department of Psychiatry at the time, and had 72 documented cases where he had solved crimes using forensic hypnosis. So never let anyone tell you that forensic hypnosis in the hands of a professional doesn't work, because it does. And I trusted Don Klein, and to his credit, Bud, who was a hypnotist himself, had wanted to hypnotize me, but I said, absolutely not, because I see you as an artist, a very good artist. He was a fabulous artist, but I don't see you as somehow anything to do whatsoever with psychology or psychiatry, and you don't have a license of any kind, so no. And he proceeded to get me the best person probably in the United States and maybe the world, Don Klein. Now, after being hypnotized by Don Klein, there were 2 sessions, and you'll see them if you watch the Discovery Channel documentary, if you watch The Visitors. And the first session was appalling. It covered a time in October before the big experience that occurred in December of 1985 that was the genesis of communion.